Florida is beautiful, a land of lush wetlands, white sand beaches, and over 1,350 miles of coastline, more than any other state in the lower 48. Its geography is striking, its ecosystems rich, and its growth explosive. But for all the good, there's one big issue hiding in plain sight. If you look at Florida's population density patterns, one thing stands out. Southern Florida is bursting with people, while the north feels almost empty. Why is that? Why does northern Florida remain so underpopulated? To understand that, we need to start with the land itself. Florida stretches nearly 500 miles from north to south, and about 460 miles across at its widest point. But despite its size, the entire state is low-lying, with its highest point, Britton Hill, just 345 feet above sea level. That's the lowest high point of any U.S. state. Beneath the surface lies a foundation of porous limestone, which fuels underground rivers and springs, but also makes the terrain prone to sinkholes, especially in the north and central parts of the state. All of this is surrounded by water. With more than 1,350 miles of coastline, Florida edges out every other state in the lower 48. The Atlantic side is lined with barrier islands and shifting sands. The Gulf Coast features wide continental shelves, salt marshes, and thick mangroves. These coastal zones are rich in biodiversity, but exposed to flooding, erosion, and violent storms. The climate shifts dramatically from one end of the state to the other. South Florida is tropical, warm, humid, and storm-prone all year. But in northern Florida, things feel different. The air is drier, winters are colder, and spring brings heavy rainfall. Snow isn't common, but frost, not unheard of. The temperature swings more sharply, and so does the weather. Geographically, the north is more varied. You get rolling hills, pine forest, and crystal-clear freshwater springs. Rivers like the St. Johns defy gravity and flow north. The land is less urban, more spread out, and far more southern in character than people expect. And it's this exact geography, the land, the water, and the climate, that has shaped not just Florida's identity, but where people decide to settle and where they didn't. Florida is the third most populous state in the U.S., home to nearly 23.5 million people. But most of them? They live in the southern half of the state. Northern Florida, especially the Panhandle, looks almost like a different world on the population map, wide, open, and sparsely settled. So why the stark divide? A big part of the answer still comes down to geography. Unlike the postcard-perfect beaches of Miami or Naples, much of the Panhandle coastline is marshy, muddy, and swamp-lined. The region's wetlands and mangroves, while ecologically vital, don't offer the same recreational pull as the soft white sands down south. Simply put, fewer tourists came and fewer people stayed. And while southern Florida is dotted with deep water harbors, cruise terminals, and navigable rivers, the Panhandle lacks major ports. Cities like Miami, Tampa, and Fort Lauderdale grew around their connections to global trade and shipping. The Panhandle? It sat close enough to New Orleans at the mouth of the Mississippi that it was never developed as a major maritime hub of its own. That early absence of economic infrastructure still echoes today. Where the South boomed with ports, railroads, and highways, the North remained more rural and slower to industrialize. Southern cities built momentum. Miami, Tampa, Orlando, Fort Lauderdale all exploded in the 20th century thanks to trade, tourism, and later, aerospace and tech. Even Orlando, which has no coastline, grew from its location amid citrus groves and later skyrocketed thanks to the Florida land boom, the Kennedy Space Center, and of course, Walt Disney World. In contrast, northern Florida's biggest city is Jacksonville, a regional hub with a strong port and a diverse economy. But even as the state's fourth largest metro, Jacksonville is still far smaller than the urban giants in the south. Beyond ports and industry, climate plays another role in the population split. Southern Florida's year-round warmth draws retirees and sunseekers from across the country and the world. Northern Florida, with its cooler winters and wider seasonal swings, doesn't have quite the same tropical appeal, and immigration patterns followed that climate line. South Florida's proximity to the Caribbean and Latin America, combined with its tropical atmosphere, turned cities like Miami into cultural magnets. Today, over 20% of Floridians speak Spanish, and Miami-Dade County feels more Latin American than almost anywhere else in the U.S. That diversity fuels growth. The Miami metro area now has over 6.1 million people, making it the 8th largest in the country. Tampa follows with 3.2 million, Orlando with 2.7 million, then finally Jacksonville with 1.6 million. Out in the Panhandle, the numbers drop dramatically. Pensacola, the region's largest metro area, has around 510,000 people. Tallahassee, the state capital, has just over 300,000. These are important cities, but they're not massive population centers. And there's one more quiet reason for Florida's growth pattern: age. Florida's population boom has been driven less by births and more by people moving in, especially those over 50. The state actually saw negative natural growth in some years, meaning more people died than were born. It's not youth that's fueling Florida, it's migration, retirement, and lifestyle. And all of this brings us to one curious twist in the state's story. Why does Florida even own the Panhandle in the first place? Back in the early 1800s, this narrow stretch of land was part of Spanish West Florida. But by 1810, with settlers frustrated under Spanish rule, the U.S. began to assert control. The Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819 sealed the deal. Spain handed over all of Florida, including the Panhandle, to the United States. When Florida officially became a U.S. territory in 1821 and later a state in 1845, the Panhandle was already written into its borders. Alabama had its chance. It became a state 2 years earlier, in 1819, but it never seriously challenged Florida's claim. And frankly, there wasn't much reason to. At the time, the Panhandle didn't offer much in the way of economic promise. No major ports, no booming industry, no bustling coastal cities. It was, and still is, a quieter, less developed corner of the state. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles to the south, Florida's other half was transforming. Cities bursting with people, culture, and commerce. The South had beaches, ports, and an international identity. But this success came at a cost, because while northern Florida may be underpopulated, southern Florida may be too populated. Florida is one of the most biodiverse states in the U.S., home to more than 4,000 species found nowhere else on Earth. Its rich ecosystem, from the Everglades to its coastal wetlands, generate billions in tourism and sustain tens of thousands of jobs. But today, all of that is under threat. Why? Because over the past few decades, the same growth that made South Florida a hotspot for retirees and immigrants has also put intense pressure on its environment. Roads expand, forests are cleared, entire neighborhoods are built on land that once belonged to panthers, manatees, and countless native species. Organizations like Miami's Pelican Harbor Seabird Station have reported increasing numbers of injured wildlife, especially in urban corridors where animals now collide with human infrastructure. And it doesn't stop there. Florida now has the highest percentage of residents over age 65 in the country. As the population continues to rise, so does the risk from climate change. Sea level rise is beginning to push younger generations inland, while older, more vulnerable populations remain along the coast. That shift presents a whole new kind of problem. How do you protect a coastline when the very people living there may not be able to adapt? For example, raising homes to protect against flooding adds staircases and structural challenges. For Florida's aging population, that's not just inconvenient, it's potentially dangerous. So here's the big picture irony. The Panhandle may be quiet, but it's also safe, stable, and ecologically intact. South Florida may be booming, but its success is now threatening the very land that made it so appealing in the first place. Florida's population gap isn't just about where people live, it's about the future of the state itself. So the next time someone tells you Florida is just beaches and retirees, remember this. It's also a story of two very different regions, one bursting at the seams and one holding steady. A tale of booming cities and quiet coastlines, of migration, nature, and history shaping a state in real time. Because in Florida, the divide between North and South isn't just about population, it's about priorities. It's about what we choose to build and what we choose to protect. If you enjoyed today's explanation, please like the video and consider subscribing. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and we'd love for you to be part of the journey. And if you want to keep exploring the fascinating geography of the US, click right here to watch our next video.